You weren't supposed to be alive. That's what the report said in black ink, stamped Kia, and filed away in a drawer no one expected to ever open again. They folded the flag, they cried over the empty casket, and the world moved on. But what happens when the dead return, not as ghosts, but as leaders? If you agree that true warriors never really disappear, make sure to like and subscribe, because this story is one you'll never forget. It began in dust and fire, in a land where maps were nothing but lies and shadows hid more than the eye could see. She was 27, the youngest in her SEAL team, a sharp-eyed soldier who moved like silence and spoke only when her words carried weight. Her name whispered through the ranks with the kind of respect you don't earn in years, but in moments. Those split-second choices where hesitation costs lives and clarity saves them. But no one outside the wire knew her name. She didn't care for parades or promises, only the mission. That mission should have been simple, or at least as simple as covert operations ever are. Insertion at night. Neutralize a weapons cache hidden inside a burned-out factory compound. Exfiltrate before dawn. She had done harder things in worse places. They all had. The kind of men and women who counted scars the way others counted birthdays. But the enemy knew. Somehow, they always seemed to know. It began with the faint pop of distant rifle fire, then the deafening crash of mortars tearing through the earth. The ambush wasn't clumsy. It was coordinated, deliberate, designed not just to kill, but to erase. She was separated in the chaos. The dust swallowed her team's shouts. Explosions shook the ground so violently that for a moment the night itself seemed to split open. She had been on point, the first through the breach. That's where the blast hit. To those watching from behind, she vanished in flame and smoke. They called her name until their voices cracked, combed the rubble until their hands bled, but there was nothing left to find. Not a trace, not a body, only silence. And silence can feel heavier than death. Back home, the paperwork came fast, cold, efficient. Killed in action. A phrase that never quite explained the hole it carved into the hearts of those who loved her. A mother collapsed in her kitchen, hands trembling as a casualty officer recited words too polished to sound human. A younger brother stared at the folded flag like it was a cruel riddle, unable to accept that someone so unbreakable could be reduced to cloth and ceremony. And the men she'd served with? They carried guilt like a second skin. Soldiers don't cry where others can see, but in the stillness of barracks at night, more than one tear fell for her. The world forgot quickly, as it always does. Her file was sealed, her medals locked away in some quiet office, and the war rolled on. But in the corners of every base where her story was told, there lingered one question whispered in half-belief. Could she have survived? The evidence said no. The fire said no. The brass said no. But deep down, those who had fought beside her remembered the way she looked in those final seconds. Calm, sharp, aware. The kind of look that doesn't go quietly. And still, her name became a ghost. Officers spoke of her in hushed tones, a cautionary tale of sacrifice. New recruits were told of her last mission, but only as a lesson in what happens when the enemy sees you first. Her picture hung in a dim hallway of the command building, framed in black, the caption beneath already fading from fingerprints pressed against the glass by those unwilling to let her go. She was a soldier remembered in grief, not in presence. What they didn't know, what no one could have guessed, was that she wasn't dead. She had crawled from the rubble half-blind, blood painting her face, ears ringing so violently the world tilted sideways. The blast hadn't killed her, it had buried her. Buried her under concrete, rebar, and silence. She woke in chains days later, dragged into the shadows of captivity where names became numbers and hope was stripped down to instinct. Most men would have broken. She didn't. She learned. She adapted. She waited. For months, she became nothing more than a rumor. Enemy whispers spoke of a captured shadow woman, the American who refused to bend. She was moved constantly, camp to camp, shackled but never silenced. When she couldn't fight, she memorized terrain, guard rotations, the weakness in their eyes. And in the darkest hours, when the weight of being forgotten pressed against her chest, she reminded herself of one truth drilled into her bones. You don't stop until the mission is done. Back in the States, the world had filed her away in the archives of the lost. At a memorial service, a nurse at the Veterans Hospital glanced at a shadow box on the wall and muttered, "Another one." Inside were medals no one in that building had ever seen before, ribbons dull with dust, citations signed by generals who no longer served. But one day, someone opened that box, and inside, tucked behind the bronze and silver, was a letter written in a hand steadier than any politician's speech. It was signed by a general, and it spoke of her with words like indispensable, unbreakable, irreplaceable. Words the world had forgotten, but the war had not. Because the war wasn't finished with her. And neither was she. They had written her name in stone. That's what it meant to be listed Kia. Official. Permanent. Carved into memorials, stamped onto plaques, folded into speeches that sounded more like eulogies than truth. The war machine doesn't leave room for second guesses. If you're gone, you're gone. That's what the generals said. That's what her team was told. That's what her mother cried herself to sleep believing. But wars are strange things. They don't always follow the rules we try to give them. Sometimes, what looks like an ending is only an intermission. Months after the ambush, the Joint Task Force gathered in silence inside a dimly lit operations tent. Faces from every branch were there: Marines, Army Rangers, Air Force TACs, Navy SEALs. The mission was bigger than any one unit now. Dismantle a hardened insurgent stronghold perched across a valley of broken rock and jagged hills. They'd already lost men trying to take it. Too many. And morale was wearing thin. The enemy had numbers, the terrain, and the arrogance that comes when you've humiliated your opponent once before. They weren't hiding this time. They wanted the Americans to come. They wanted to break them again. The briefing was tense. A general pointed to a grainy satellite image of the compound, his finger tapping at red circles. "We take these positions, we cut their supply line. Without it, they're cornered. But expect resistance." Everyone in that tent already knew what that meant. Expect resistance was military code for "we're sending you into hell and praying you make it out." The operation launched at dawn. Armored convoys moved under a pale sun. Helicopters thumped overhead. Boots crunched across sand that had been soaked in too much blood before. For the first hour, it seemed almost manageable. Resistance was scattered, firefights brief. A few bursts of enemy fire, then silence. A dangerous silence. Because the ambush came just like before. Mortars shrieked from the ridgelines. Rockets cut across the sky. Machine gun nests opened up from concealed bunkers. Vehicles erupted into fireballs, smoke choking the valley. Soldiers scrambled for cover. Radios barked with broken orders. The scene collapsed into chaos in minutes. Pinned down, outgunned, and with casualties mounting, the task force dug into shallow cover. Every man and woman knowing the truth in their gut. They weren't getting out of this valley alive. The ridges were death traps, the compound a fortress. And then came the whispers, the panicked voices across comms. They knew we were coming. They knew, just like last time. That last time still haunted them. The mission where she had fallen. The mission where the best of them had been swallowed by fire. And then, something shifted. At first, no one saw her. Just a silhouette against the smoke, cresting the ridgeline above the battlefield. One soldier squinted through his scope and muttered, "No way." Another rubbed his eyes, convinced exhaustion was playing tricks. But then she stepped fully into the light. Her rifle was slung low, her stance steady. The helmet was different, the gear stripped down, mismatched like it had been scavenged over months. But the way she moved, fluid, sharp, unshaken, it was unmistakable. It was her. The woman they had buried in words, mourned in silence, cursed the war for taking. The one stamped as Kia. She was alive. A murmur swept through the ranks, soldiers pressing closer to their scopes. Disbelief battling with recognition. It's her. It can't be. She's dead. No, that's her. And then she raised the rifle. The first shot cracked through the valley like lightning splitting the sky. An enemy gunner toppled backward from a nest. Another shot. Another body dropped. Controlled, precise, devastatingly calm. She moved like death itself had taught her patience, picking targets others couldn't even see. The enemy panicked. Confusion rippled across their lines. They hadn't accounted for this. How could they? She was supposed to be gone. They had told themselves she was gone. But now the ghost stood on the ridge, raining fire with the fury of someone who had crawled out of a grave and come back hungrier than before. On the ground, pinned soldiers felt the shift in their bones. Morale wasn't something you could measure on a map, but you could feel it. And in that moment, it rose like fire. The hopelessness cracked. Men shouted to each other with new urgency. Leaders barked orders, no longer hollow but sharp, rallying. Push up. Move forward. And they did, because she was back. She descended into the valley like she had never left it. Moving between cover, signaling squads, cutting down machine gunners as if she'd been tracking them for weeks. And the truth was, she had. For months in captivity, she'd memorized every hill, every patrol pattern, every weakness in their fortress. When she escaped, she didn't just survive, she hunted. She built maps in her head, marked caches of weapons she stole one at a time. She became a phantom stalking the very men who had tried to erase her. And now, on the battlefield where her name had been buried, she brought every ounce of that knowledge crashing down on them. Her team saw her first, the ones who had mourned her hardest. One of them choked out her name over comms, his voice breaking mid-syllable. For a moment, he couldn't move. Then, like a dam breaking, he surged forward, screaming, rallying the men around him. She's alive. She's alive, damn it. Push forward. What followed wasn't chaos. It was clarity. She took point, as she always had, and they followed without hesitation. It wasn't rank. It wasn't orders. It was something older, something stronger, the kind of authority only survival grants. She didn't need a call sign. She didn't need a radio. Every movement she made told them what to do. Cover there. Flank here. Press now. The compound that had once looked impenetrable suddenly cracked. Enemy fighters broke under the weight of her presence. They had killed her once, and yet here she was. And if death couldn't hold her, what chance did they have? By dusk, the valley had changed hands. The stronghold fell. Fires burned where the bunkers had stood. And in the smoke, in the stunned silence that followed, soldiers gathered around her like moths to flame. No one spoke at first. They just stared, touching her shoulder, gripping her hand, as if making sure she was real. Finally, one voice whispered what they were all thinking. You were dead. She met his eyes, steady as ever. Not yet. And that was all she said. In the debrief that night, generals stumbled over words. Protocol shattered. How do you process a soldier you buried, now standing in front of you with enemy maps etched in a memory and a rifle still warm from battle? Some questioned her presence. Others tried to explain it away. But none of their words mattered, because the men and women who had fought in that valley already knew the truth. She wasn't just alive. She was in command. And when the call came to appoint a leader for the newly formed Joint Task Force, the decision should have been complicated. It wasn't. Not after what they had seen. Not after she had walked out of fire and into legend. That night, as the stars spread across the sky still choked with smoke, she stood before them not as the woman they thought they lost, but as the commander they had found. They had seen impossible things in war. Men surviving falls from helicopters, convoys rolling through firestorms, enemies appearing out of nowhere only to vanish back into dust. But nothing compared to what they had seen that day in the valley. A soldier they had buried by name, returned not as a ghost, but as the beating heart of their victory. The night after the battle was quiet in the way war sometimes is. Not peace, but exhaustion. Soldiers sat slumped against vehicles, helmets discarded, eyes glazed with that hollow look only combat gives. Smoke drifted upward from the wreckage of enemy bunkers. The stars blinked, sharp and indifferent above it all. And in the middle of that silence, she stood. Word had already spread across the task force like wildfire. She's alive. Men who hadn't known her still stared, as if she'd stepped straight out of legend. Those who had fought with her once before couldn't stop watching, afraid that if they blinked she might disappear again. In the command tent, the generals tried to make sense of it. Papers shuffled, phones buzzed, hushed arguments snapped back and forth. She was declared Kia. The paperwork. There was nothing left. How do we explain this? Explain it? She just saved this mission. That's all the explanation we need. But the noise died the moment she walked inside. She wasn't wearing rank insignia anymore. Most of her uniform had been patched together for months on the run, gear stolen, scavenged, repurposed. But her presence filled the tent heavier than any decoration. She stood calm, rifle slung, dirt and blood still streaked across her face. And when she looked at the generals, it wasn't defiance. It was something steadier. Sit, she said softly. And they did. No one questioned it. Not even the man who had commanded entire divisions. For a long moment, the only sound was the flap of canvas in the desert wind. Finally, one general cleared his throat, trying to find words where there were none. We thought. He stopped. There was no way to finish it. She answered for him. You thought I died. So did I. The tent held its breath. She told them. Not with drama, not with theatrics, just with the stripped-down cadence of a soldier reporting facts. The blast buried her. Concrete, fire, steel. When she woke, she was in chains. Prisoner. They wanted her broken. Instead, she learned. She memorized their camps, their supply lines, their commanders' weaknesses. She waited. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months. She escaped when they got lazy, killed 2 guards with a piece of rebar, ran until her feet bled, hid in ravines and caves, stole food when she could, weapons when she had to. I was off the grid, she said, voice even. But I wasn't gone, and I wasn't finished. One of the younger officers leaned forward, almost whispering, Why didn't you try to contact us? She turned her gaze to him, steady as stone. Because I wasn't ready. If I had called you, they would have found me before you did, and then you'd be the ones in graves. I wasn't coming back until I could finish the mission. Silence again. But it wasn't disbelief anymore. It was reverence. One general finally stood, his shoulders slumped with something that looked like shame. We failed you. We left you behind. Her eyes flicked up, sharp but calm. You didn't fail me. The war isn't about one person. You did what you had to do. I did too. Now here we are. No bitterness. No accusation. Just truth. Outside the tent, soldiers had gathered, drawn by instinct. They knew something bigger than orders was happening inside. And when she finally stepped out, the crowd fell silent. Hundreds of eyes fixed on her. Some wide with awe, some brimming with tears, some hardened into the kind of loyalty only forged by fire. She looked at them all, scanning faces lit by the dull glow of floodlights and burning wreckage. Then she spoke, not shouting, not preaching, just steady enough for every word to carry. You buried me, she said. You wrote my name down and called me gone. But here I am. Not because I'm lucky, not because I'm stronger, but because I refuse to quit. Her voice cut through the night like steel. You want to know how I survived? I remembered you. Every single one of you. I remembered the faces of those we lost. And I decided I would not stop until I finished what we started. That's why I'm here. That's why we won today. Not because I came back, but because none of us ever really left the fight. The soldiers shifted. Some nodded. Some clenched fists. Some whispered her name like a prayer. Then came the words that stunned even the generals. As of tonight, I'm not your ghost. I'm your commander. The Joint Task Force doesn't answer to desks and paperwork anymore. It answers to the mission. It answers to the blood already spilled. And if you follow me, I'll make you one promise. We will not stop until the job is done. The air trembled. It wasn't a speech. It was a vow. And they believed her. Every single one. That night, she assumed command. Not with ceremony. Not with papers signed in Washington, but with the unshakable loyalty of warriors who had just seen the impossible made flesh. Orders came out of her mouth, and no one questioned them. Patrols shifted. Supply lines rerouted. Defenses hardened. The task force, once fractured by doubt and loss, snapped into unity like a drawn blade. In the days that followed, the enemy crumbled. Positions they had held for years fell in weeks. Fighters surrendered in droves. The very rumor of her return spread through villages and strongholds alike, carried on whispers, the dead American walks. Enemies fled before battles even began. And those who stayed learned too late that there is nothing more dangerous than someone who has already been through death and come back with purpose. But the true reckoning wasn't with the enemy. It was with her own. At headquarters, stateside, officers sat stunned as reports came in. Who's commanding this task force? That's not possible. She's dead. You'll have to update the records, sir. And for once, the bureaucracy bent to reality. The paperwork that had sealed her fate was torn apart by the undeniable truth of her victories. When she finally addressed her troops in full assembly, it wasn't in dress uniform or under polished banners. It was in the dirt, standing on a makeshift platform, dust still on her boots, rifle at her side. Thousands gathered, Americans, coalition allies, even civilians who had come to see the face of the soldier who refused to die. She stood silent at first, letting the weight of the moment sink in. Then she said only this. I didn't come back to be remembered. I came back to finish the fight. No applause followed. No cheers. Just silence, deep and heavy. The kind of silence that means people are listening with every bone in their body. From that day forward, her legend spread, not because she demanded it, but because those who had seen her rise could not stop telling the story. The soldier declared Kia who returned to command. The ghost who became a general without needing stars on her shoulders. The warrior who proved that true strength isn't surviving for yourself, it's surviving for everyone who can't. And years later, when recruits stood in classrooms and asked about leadership, instructors didn't point to manuals or doctrine. They pointed to her story. They said her name. They told how one woman, written off as dead, reappeared to change the course of a war. Some warriors fade. Some are forgotten. But the ones who refuse to quit, even after death itself tries to claim them, those are the ones who leave a mark you can't erase. And she was one of them.